Bo Peterson is a graduate of U of O and U of O Law School. He also has a 2006 bar number. He also clerked for Judge Brownhill for a summer. He went to work as a divorce lawyer for Jody Stahancic, but he got tired of being an indentured servant, and so he came over in 2007 as well. But he does answer divorce questions if you got any. It's rare to have, as I said earlier, to have Scott and Bo, guys with that much experience in the office, and even more. Bo just finished the Capel case and did a great job. So he's going to talk about crash cases, because it seems like more and more we're getting fatal crashes or non-fatal crashes involving people under the influence all the time. So take it away, Bo.
All right, and got a microphone here. I'm likely to wander, because that's what I do. Let's see.
No, it's right. It's the green button. Here, take this one.
Okay, I'll trade you.
Yeah.
All right, maybe that's a little bit better. As Ron said, I'm Bo. You guys should all know me, or at least most of you do. And we're going to spend our last time today talking about crash cases. If we're real lucky this one will work. Play it. Yeah, it's a YouTube.
Yabba dabba doo! Simpson, Homer Simpson, he's the greatest guy in history. From the town of Springfield, he's about to hit a chestnut tree.
Car crashes. All right, and grab my clicker. So, come on. There we go. All right, car crash basics. What are we talking about when we're talking about a car crash? We're not really talking about Homer Simpson for the most part, because that's just him hitting a tree. He may be injured. We're not going to worry about him so much. You may have a criminal mischief case, I suppose, for a damaged tree, but what we're really talking about here is when you've got a car that's hitting a pedestrian, a car that's hitting another vehicle, or a car that has passengers and those passengers are getting injured. We're mostly concerned here about injuries to innocent parties. When do we really care? When we're talking about some kind of reckless driving, a lot of times that's going to be under the influence. You guys know that, but it doesn't have to be. If you've got someone bombing out Highway 26 at 100 miles an hour, and they can't keep control, they cross the center line and they hurt or kill somebody, that's reckless, and we're absolutely going to be talking about major assaults or if they kill somebody, a manslaughter. So it does not have to be under the influence. Think about the manner in which a person was driving, not just whether or not they're impaired when you're out on a crash scene. Let's talk about some of the charges that we can get out of these. The most serious one that we're going to be looking at is manslaughter in the first degree. That's recklessly causing the death of another human being under circumstances manifesting extreme indifference to the value of human life. Recklessness, I think you guys should have a pretty good handle on. We're talking about someone who's under the influence or someone who's operating their vehicle in a reckless manner, and that recklessness is the cause of the death. Extreme indifference is the real key on this one. What does that mean? It's a big, long, lawyerly phrase. What it means is it's got to go beyond that recklessness. It's evidence that the defendant cared little about the risk of death to another human being. We can show that in a lot of different ways. If they've got prior DUIs, and we're talking about a DUI, that's some of the case law that we've got that's very, very good for us. Some of the other stuff that we can use is their attitude after the crash. Did they care about what they did? Are they remorseful about the person that they've hurt or killed? Or are they more concerned about themselves, more concerned about something else in the vehicle? Are they fighting with the EMTs? We've had cases like that. The manner in which they're driving, just because you're under the influence, doesn't mean you should be driving like a complete jackass. There's a case out of Eugene. It was good extreme indifference. Not only was the guy drunk, he was running red lights. He was exceeding the speed limit by almost double. Winds up crashing into someone, and in that one also was fighting the EMTs that were trying to help him. That was a good extreme indifference case. If we get to manslaughter in the first degree, we're talking about a measure 11 sentence, and we're talking about 10 years if they're convicted of that charge. A step down from that is manslaughter in the second degree. One too far, manslaughter in the second degree. That's just recklessly causing the death of another human being. That's where we can't get that extreme indifference. That's 75 months on a Measure 11 sentence. If we don't have a death, but we have an assault, it's similar things. Assault in the second degree, we've got to have the recklessness, we've got to have the extreme indifference. We need use of a weapon. In these cases, we're going to be talking about the vehicle. Vehicles, generally speaking, are going to be weapons. And for assault in the second degree, we also need serious physical injury. We'll talk a little bit about what that is as we get a little further into this, because serious physical injury can be a high bar for us. Sometimes the Court of Appeals is not helpful for us on that. But if we've got assault in the second degree, those are also Measure 11 charges. Those can be up to 70 months per victim. That's the mandatory minimum, I should say. Assault in the third degree, it's when you're missing assault in the second degree on one prong or another. Either you've got extreme indifference but only physical injury, or you don't have extreme indifference but you still have serious physical injury. We're talking about assault in the third degree. If it's a DUI, we're looking at presumptive prison, whether they've got a record or not. They may not go because judges have discretion there, and as we've talked about through this whole thing, there's plea bargaining situations, but on the sentencing grid block, if it's a DUI, assault 3, we're looking at somewhere between 16 and 45 months. So these are cases that we can get good sentences on if we investigate them the right way. But they can be a challenge to investigate the right way. So let's talk about some of those things. Injuries. You guys, I know, talked about domestic violence earlier today. We talked about what is and what is not physical injury, where we need either impairment of a physical condition or substantial pain. For a lot of these cases, we're looking at that line between physical injury and serious physical injury. Serious physical injury, the ones that we're going to get most often are protracted impairment. So we're going to have to take some time, get medical records, find out how long this is affecting them. A simple broken bone is probably not going to get us there, but a compound fracture is usually going to last long enough that we're going to be able to get there. Photos, that night on the scene. Take lots and lots of photos. We're actually going to get to a diagram that Trooper Bush sent me for how we should be documenting the scene on a car crash as far as the photos of the scene. But we also want photos of injuries. If the EMTs are sitting there, it seems intrusive, I know. If the EMTs are sitting there working on someone who's bleeding, you don't want to be getting in the way. But we do want documentation of that because that's going to be good evidence in front of a jury. It is very important to get an idea, at least that night, of how seriously each person is injured so we know if we should be waiting on medical records or not. If we're talking about bumps and bruises, we know we're normal physical injury most likely. If people are going to hospitals, we need to know which hospital they are going to so that we can get medical records.
And many times you can't go by the first determination because they're got an adrenaline rush, which is a pain suppressant, so they may not even know themselves how badly they're injured.
That's a very good point. Absolutely, Ron. So follow-up is going to be important as well. Sometimes they don't go to the hospital for 2 or 3 days. We need to know who these people are. We need names, contact information, and if they're going to seek medical attention, we need to know where. Here in Clatsop County, they're probably going to start at either CMH or Providence Seaside. But if they're serious injuries and they wind up in the trauma system, there's 2 or 3 different hospitals in Portland that they could wind up in, maybe a couple of more. Often legacy, but not always. And we need to know where they're treated so that we can get those records.
Sometimes things don't look like they're going to be a long-term injury just because it's not typical, but depending upon the physical makeup of the victim, the rule is that you take your victim as you find them. If you've got an old person or if you've got a person who's been through a couple car crashes before and who maybe has more injury than the average person, even if it's not charged a felony to start with, we can always take a look at those injury cases and go back to grand jury at some point in time.
Yes, we can. As long as they haven't pled yet, we can go back on them and elevate the charges. Damage to vehicles and damage to property. Photograph, photograph, photograph. And when we're talking about both of those things, we're going to want estimations as far as repairs. It's not the best charge and not the most serious charge we're looking at, but we usually do look to get people's property replaced. Witnesses. You've got to be talking to every possible witness. You never know who saw something that's going to be crucial, especially in a car crash case. And that means the drivers, that means the passengers, that means other vehicles in the area. Especially if you're in a city, that may mean patrons in the local business if they've got windows or if they're hanging out outside. Pedestrians that were nearby, all of these people may have seen how this crash happened. And if you've investigated any of these things, you'll know that talking to 10 different people, you're going to get 10 slightly different stories about how it happened. And we've got to be able to put all of that together if we're going to paint an accurate picture of this crash. And being able to figure out how the crash happened is key in showing that recklessness and really getting us to the crux of this case. Injuries we talked a little bit about already. We really need to know where people are going. Roadway evidence. OSP guys, I know you guys are going to know some of this stuff. I know you guys, everyone gets some of this at the academy, and we know you're not crash reconstructionists, and trust me, we'll talk about when to be calling them in, but photographs are important. If you see gouge marks, if you see yaw marks, if you see skid marks, photograph them. Speaking with Trooper Bush, paint is your friend. Mark whatever you need to make sure that you can remember where it was, especially in the middle of the night, because we want you to come back at some point and get photographs in the light of day so we can actually see things a little more clearly. 2 in the morning, even with your flash, it's hard to make out all of the details of what you're trying to show us. So it's important to go back that next day and get us photographs in the good light of day. Measurements. The wheel measure doesn't do a particularly good job. Guesstimates don't do a good job. If this is a serious crash, we want a total station out there. OSP, I know, has access to a couple of them, and Jim Pierce over at Warrington PD has one. They're available. Let's make sure that we're getting them out there because those measurements can oftentimes really tell us how fast someone was going, and that gets us a lot closer to extreme indifference. They can tell us whether or not someone actually applied braking, and that can be very, very important, or any kind of avoidance maneuvers, braking, turning, any of that really gets important. Now, as you can guess, one too far. This is what Trooper Bush sent me. Supposedly, you guys have likely seen this at the academy, but he tells me that the vast majority of times he looks at cases, it was not followed. So if you're photographing a crash scene, this is what he wants to see. Start at one end, start walking. Every 4 to 5 steps, take a photograph. When you get to the vehicles, complete all the way around of the vehicle, including at least one on the interior. Go past the crash scene as far as you need to. Turn around and do the same thing coming back. Yes, it will be a lot of photographs. We want that. The more photographs, the better.
And check out the seatbelts.
Absolutely. Yep. And the bottom one there is 360 degrees of each vehicle, at least 16 photos as you move around the vehicle, and at least one showing the interior and restraints. If the restraints were used or not used, we want photographs of that. There's a reason for that, and that's if they were used, a lot of times we can see stretching, and that'll help us determine what happened, who was in which seat, or if they weren't used and someone's saying they were, we're going to be able to, show some dishonest statements there, and that's always very, very helpful. Vehicle search warrants. One of the things that you're going to do is you're investigating one of these cases, and a little later on here we'll talk about major crime team callouts because that's something we want to start doing, especially on manslaughters and assault 2 level type cases. One of the things that needs to be done are search warrants for the vehicles. One thing that we always need to do is a vehicle inspection. We need to make sure that there's not a mechanical reason for this crash. So you're going to get a search warrant. We're going to get a mechanic. The guy over at the college has been willing to do a lot of those for us. And we're going to make sure that it wasn't a steering cable that snapped or brakes that went out or any of those possible reasons other than the guy's intoxication or other than the person's speed that caused this crash. And it's
Accelerator stuck.
Accelerator stuck we run into. Broken throttle cable we've had as a defense, I think, at one point. The other thing, and this is really interesting. Modern vehicles, as you guys probably know, are pretty much computers on wheels. Everything these days has a computer in it. Your car is no exception. It started with airbag control modules were kind of the first really cool thing that we could start getting data off of. What the airbag control module does is it keeps track of how fast your vehicle's going and how fast it decelerates so it can determine whether or not to fire that airbag in to save your life. Because of that, it keeps that data. We can get a search warrant for it. There's a list of the makes and models of the vehicles that we can pull airbag control module, and there's a couple other modules, and actually get that data off of. That list is 80 pages, so I did not print one for all of you guys. I think our plan is to include it with the materials that we're hoping to send out at this. I've got a copy, and I know Trooper Bush at OSP has it, and I'm sure he's happy to share it. We'll try and get one out to at least command staff at each agency so that someone's got one somewhere you guys can take a look at. It's going to be able to tell you the speed before any kind of braking. It can usually tell you if there is any kind of braking, and those are both very important types of information. But there's things you have to do to make sure that we can get that information. You've got to keep people from messing with the vehicles. If you cycle the ignition, you're going to start overriding that airbag control module, and we're not going to be able to get that data. So get the keys out of the vehicles as soon as possible. Even when you're towing them, don't let the tow operators turn those vehicles on. They're going to have to load it without starting the vehicle. That is pretty well critically important, and that was one of the things that Trooper Bush really wanted me to mention. So get the keys out, don't let anyone start them, don't let anyone fiddle with them. Obviously, when you've got injured parties, you're not going to be clearing them out of the vehicles immediately, but to the extent you can get people out of the vehicles so that they can't mess with them, that's going to be important to make sure that we can get that data off the ACMs. All right, this is one of the newest areas, and I frankly just learned about this getting ready for this presentation. A lot of cars these days have integrated systems that are your GPS. You hook your phone into them for Bluetooth calls or to play music. They'll play your satellite radio. They keep all that data, especially the GPS data. OSP is looking at getting the software to do this. They don't have it yet, but the RCFL does. And so if it's the kind of case where we really want that data, there is a resource in the state that we can use to get it. The RCFL is a little slow, but it's there. And what they're going to be able to do, especially because of the GPS, they're going to be able to get you speeds. They're going to be able to get you the routes that someone had punched in, where they were headed, stops that they made along the way. If we're talking about a DUI case and we think they were drinking as they drove through the county, which happens periodically, well, if you've got 3 GPS stops at bars, that's pretty helpful evidence. Vehicle events, that can be things like braking. That can be things like when your lane assist starts flashing at you. If you've driven in a newer car, it will tell you when you're crossing the center line. And so it's going to track those. You're going to be able to see, hey, he crossed the center line multiple times. Yes, Sean?
Is it recording that data even if you're not actively using the GPS system?
Most of them probably are. What we can pull and what we can't is, it's a very quickly moving target. The company that is building this is adding cars to it as we go, and OSP doesn't have it yet, but they, according to Billy, Trooper Bush, he really thought that they'd have it here fairly soon. But yes, it is. And the same thing, and that also counts with the airbag control module. Thank you for reminding me. Just because the airbag didn't fire doesn't mean there's not data in that ACM that we can use. If it's even halfway close to the line, it's still picking up that data and saving it. So even though the airbag didn't fire into someone, we can still grab that ACM and get some useful information off it.
But the RCFL is the only one that can process that?
The RCFL is the only one that can do the information, infotainment systems is what they call it, the GPS/phone stuff. The ACM, the airbag control modules, OSP can do. They've got the hardware to do that.
Got it.
But this one at the moment is RCFL. OSP is hoping to purchase it here shortly and be able to do that. Vehicle events, connected devices, it will tell you which phones were connected at the time. That can be very useful if you've got someone saying, I wasn't in that car, or I wasn't the driver, or things of that nature. Yeah. Or I wasn't texting. And texting and driving is probably reckless at this point. We all know not to do it, right?
Yeah.
If someone is doing it, I think that's probably reckless. You do that and kill somebody, we're going to charge you.
Seems half the people you pass on the road are staring at the map.
Aren't they? All right. These investigations are complicated. It takes a lot of moving parts. We don't expect you guys to be able to do all of this by yourself. Frankly, it's a mountain of work, and hopefully none of your command staffs are expecting you to do one of these investigations by yourself, because you'll be buried for a month. It's a pile of work to do them. If it's a Measure 11 type case, Trooper Bush says he is authorized to respond to just about anything that's a Measure 11, whether it's on a state highway or a county road, especially if there's 2 vehicles involved. And call your friendly DA. We are around. Most of us keep our cell phones on us just about 24/7. I know I do. It's next to my bed when I'm sleeping. If there's a major crash and you've got one of these cases that you think is going to be a Measure 11 assault or a manslaughter, please call us. We will get the major crime team out there. Some of the major crime team detectives might not want to hear that, but this is the kind of case that there's 7 different places that we're going to need investigators, and it's the kind of case that's appropriate to do it in. Because when you've got, and we're about to get to the toxicology, when you've got a suspect at one hospital and you've got witnesses in another hospital and witnesses that are at roadside and measurements to take and photos to take, you can't do that all by yourself, and you probably can't do that asking the other guy that's on duty that night to help you out because he's got his own calls to cover. So please call us, and we'll see if we can get you some resources. Continuing through the investigation, this is really when we're talking about a DUI. It's not enough just to be able to say, it's generally not enough just to be able to say that someone has controlled substances or alcohol in their system. You guys should have heard this through the DUI part, but we have to show the impairment. I had a manslaughter that had issues just recently, and it was no fault of the officers. He did a darn good job, but it was very hard to show impairment, and we got a decent plea, but not as good as, frankly, I think anyone wanted. It was closer to 2 years than the 6 or 7.
The hospital records, right?
That was about all we had, and the hospital wasn't very helpful for us. The officer actually saw more impairment than medics did, and when medics and the doctor are disagreeing with my officer, that's going to be a challenge. I believe that the guy was impaired because he had methamphetamine in his blood. That's a pretty good clue, but it was going to be a challenging case. So if the defendant is not going to the hospital, go ahead and run them through your field sobriety tests. Look for other signs and symptoms of impairment and make sure you're documenting them, everyone that you can find. And just like in a DUI, if you think it's drugs, get a DRE involved. That's what they're here for, and frankly, a lot of the ones that we're getting these days are drugs. We've had, I think in the last several years of the manslaughters, I think only one of them has been alcohol that I can remember, the rest have been drugs.
Yep, that's right.
If the defendant's going to the hospital, which will often happen in your higher speed crashes, frankly, for some, I won't say for some reason, it's pretty apparent if you think about it, but they often wind up with a broken leg. Usually the right or the left, depending on which leg they tried to jam down at the last second on the brakes. But the driver, the offending driver often seems to wind up with a broken leg. There are still some field sobriety tests you can do depending on injuries. I understand you're not going to be able to do all of them, but absolutely. He can only stand on one leg to start with, right? You can do HDN. He can do that sitting down, and I know that there's an expert that'll come help us with that if we wind up having to do it that way, and it's important. Finger count, a lot of times you can probably do if the pain level's not too high. Make any other observations that you can. Look at their eyes, smell their breath. Just try and get whatever you can to help us show that there's actually impairment there rather than just a crash with toxicology. If medics are taking the suspects, try and get notes as to for sure that they're taking them, but also who the medics people are, because those can be helpful witnesses for us and we can get those records. And then at the hospital, same thing. The hospital staff's not going to want to talk to you about a lot of details, but if the guy's flipping out and cursing at them, they'll probably tell you that, and that can be very useful. And one of the manslaughters Ron and I did, the suspect was screaming and yelling and trying to fight the hospital staff, and that wasn't a good look for him. If you have an injury crash or a fatal crash, and your suspect winds up at the hospital, and they're going to take a toxicology sample because they need to know whether or not someone's impaired before they treat him, they're required by state statute to tell you the results of that toxicology. If they don't want to do it, get us on the phone and we'll point them to the state statute. It's in the 600s somewhere, 621 something I want to say. Which brings us to a little bit more about toxicology. If we're looking at a DUI, toxicology is going to be very, very important. If it's alcohol, we want to know what it is. Breath tests are okay, especially if they're not in the hospital, but blood is probably better. Juries like it more. They don't hate the breath test machine, but especially if we're talking about a manslaughter, they'd rather have a lab tech sitting there telling you what the actual blood alcohol was.
Plus, we can put the breath test result in the search warrant affidavit just to bolster.
Yes, we can. Absolutely. If we're looking at controlled substances, we need blood and we need urine. We need them as soon as possible. The blood we are going to wind up having to have tested in the state of Washington. Oregon Crime Lab does not do non-dead person blood testing for drugs, but Washington will still help us, at least on major cases, and there's another lab that we can use, although they're on the East Coast, and so it's very expensive if we have to. But
Typically want blood tests for alcohol and for most of the controlled substances, except for heroin. Heroin's leaves your system and gets metabolized so quickly that it's down to morphine within very short period of time,
Within-
less than an hour. And when it's only morphine, then they can't tell whether it's been administered by medics or whether it's actually heroin.
Which is why you often want, go ahead, yeah.
That last sentence,
Yeah,
hard to get these days.
yes, it is.
That's a tough one.
I know it is.
It'd be great, I mean, I don't know what kind of influence you guys could have on that with the local ambulance service or something like that, but it's very hard, increasingly.
So medics doesn't want to come help pull blood?
Well, not exigent draws.
Really?
Not exigent. They'll do it with a search warrant all day long. But if you got a guy on the scene that and I've sat there and said,
Yeah.
I'm about to pump drugs from this guy, he's about to have all this other blood just.
Right.
I think particularly it depends on where the crash happens, how far the person is away from hospital or that sort of thing. If it's clear out in Jewel, it's a different story than if it's a block away from the hospital.
Well, for us, see, we had one recently, not so recently, last year, where a guy crashed his car, they wanted to go trauma, take him to the trauma center, but we don't have that at the stage, so.
Right.
Take him on the way to Astoria, had an officer follow him, but I mean, I figured that was enough time to say, hey, we need to get a blood, just one bottle, something, get an extra.
Yeah.
I'm gonna run a search warrant, we're gonna follow it up with a search warrant.
Yeah, we'd love to get involved in that because we want the first draw. We want the draw as close in time to the driving as possible. That's the ultimate goal.
And I can understand medics saying, hey, we've got to make sure this guy doesn't die first, but after that, there's no reason they shouldn't be taking an exigent draw. And if they're fighting you, then yeah, I think we can start talking to their bosses or whoever their managing doctor is and start convincing them to do it the other way.
I'll call Dwayne.
Please do. All right, a little bit more on toxicology. If the defendant, so if the defendant's not going to the hospital, you're probably going to be following pretty close to your standard procedure, except if we're looking at that assault 2 or manslaughter, not only do we want that breath test, we're going to want blood, certainly down the road. So as you can see, follow your breath test procedure and then get a warrant, get a blood sample, get a urine sample. If they're at the hospital, obviously you need to find out which hospital, and you need to get an officer there ASAP, whether it's you or whether it's someone or not helping you. That first toxicology sample, if we can get consent, great. If we can't get consent, we want an exigent draw ASAP. And then you're going to follow it up with a search warrant for both blood and urine. CMH at least, and I believe PSH will do the same, is if you ask them to, they will hold your the toxicology samples that they seize because they're getting their own. They'll hold them for you to come write a search warrant and get those. That is not our best evidence, but it's not bad in a pinch. They do not have the same type of chain of custody that you guys are going to use. And that will be brought out by the defense attorney, sometimes over and over and over again. And if you don't tell them you're coming, they'll destroy them. Most hospitals are destroying blood within 48 hours. Urine, maybe a week. So make sure that
Used to be a 10-day window there for a while.
used to be on urine, but I don't think they're holding on to blood hardly at all. Andy, you had something?
Just a question on the blood.
Yeah.
And then this one's where, long story short, the guy went on his own, pick up his blood basically the next day.
Yeah.
And so, will the hospital,
If we don't have a warrant in hand, they will turn that blood over to him. I had Steve Roman do that on more than one occasion because he knew we'd go for it. And it's theirs. They can go get it if they want to. If we've got a search warrant in hand, if we beat them there, then we get to seize it. But we can get the records of their toxicology. They do things differently than our crime lab does, though. Their blood alcohol test is run off of serum rather than whole blood, so the numbers don't quite translate. It's about a 10% difference. If you can tell them to preserve it for you, but if the suspect shows up and says, I want my toxicology samples, there's really nothing they can do because he owns them. And if you don't have legal process in place to get them, they're going to have to turn them over. Otherwise, you're seizing them without, you know what I mean? It's the same as on search and seizure. You're seizing something without legal process, and we're not likely to fall into an exception at that point, especially since ideally we'll have already gotten our own toxicology samples the night before. If the defendant's not at the hospital, obviously we're looking for alcohol. If it's not alcohol, we want a DRE in, and we want a warrant for blood and urine as soon as we can get them. Likes to double click, doesn't it? I did that a little quicker than I had planned, but I had slightly short time, and Ron asked me to shoot for 4:45. I've got a couple of minutes, so if there's other questions, I'm happy to field them, and I know Ron will as well. These are serious cases, and we want to work them as best we can. We don't have it quite in place yet. We are working on getting a specific crash team ready to go for when these happen. And that's part of why we've been picking up, Sergeant Pierce picked up a total station for Warrenton to be able to help out with that. So anyway, questions about things you've seen or what I'm saying as far as what we want done on these? No, it's all right. I assume it's on the list that we send out to all your guys' agencies anyway. I've had it since I got here. All right, anyone else? Okay.
Want to thank everybody for being here. We're going to do this annually, so for anybody that wasn't here, tell them about it and tell them they can come watch the video if they'd like. We're proud of our office, and we like to help you guys to do the best job you can. I'm proud of this county. I think we have great law enforcement in this county, and this just, well, hopefully pulls us all together and gives us common goals and makes us a little better. So thanks very much.